Hi, thanks all for coming. As Justin said, this body of work really is what I've done already, and it gave me the inspiration and idea as a starting point for the PhD. We'll talk in further detail as the presentation moves on about where the ideas from this are hoping to form the PhD. So I used to be a fashion educator. I used to work at Sheffield Hallam University. I used to be course leader there for the fashion design programme. So I had the opportunity of having a lot of students at my disposal to do some kind of focus groups on, and this really is what the presentation's about. So I'm hoping to give about a 20-minute presentation and then probably about a 50 minutes workshop. Okay, so as Justin said, it's about 3D to 2D translation to assist students really with the concept of pattern making, shape making. I felt as an educator that many students are practical learners and are reluctant to experiment with form and structure, perhaps because of a perceived lack of confidence or skill in shape making, pattern making. So I chose volume as a vehicle to try and help with that issue. And to expand the student learning experience, to bring uncertainty and risk into the creative process, and to open students up to a process-led framework that brings together design and pattern making. The process that I'm going to talk about requires no formal knowledge of pattern making, so it's interdisciplinary and open to anyone really. The process of creating excess volume has the potential to create interesting shapes that do not contour the body, so hence getting fabric away from the body. Why? Could be conceptual, experimental, outside of fashion, so it's not trend-led, spontaneous, non-prescribed, without preconceived ideas, comfortable, less restricting, timeless, and hopefully sustainable. Just a bit of background, the cultural context, often used, if we look back, for comfortable movement, protection, historical, creating volume, as we can see from cage structures, padded structures. In this instance, probably to denote wealth and status, and to accentuate really the curves of the breast and the smallness of the waist. So padding, in that sense, is not necessarily a new thing, but I'm hoping to use it in a slightly different context. So the fashion context, Western designers from the last 50 or so years creating volume through gathering, layering, flat shaping, and in technology, the one on the right, Iris van Herpen. So there's a combination of designers there, just very quickly, Balenciaga, McQueen, Victor and Wolf, Madame Gray, Iris van Herpen and Isabel Toledo. Also looking at Japanese designers because they approach things slightly differently from probably a more philosophical perspective, abstract, holistic, empathic, which is what I'm hoping to tap into. They talk more about body and movement, exploration of space between the body and clothes, and the space that the clothing inhabits. Just got a couple of quotes that meant quite a lot to me. Yohji Yamamoto, deep philosophy in his designs. The quote, "Are you listening? The fabric has much to teach us. How does the cloth want to drape, to sway, to fall? If one keeps these things in mind and looks very carefully, the fabric itself begins to speak." It also says, I like it when there's air between the garment and the body. Another quick quote from the pattern cutters at Comme des Garçons. Speaking of the brand director, Ray Kawakibo, she said to them, well, this is the pattern cutter speaking, another time she didn't produce anything, but talked about a pattern for a coat that would have the qualities of a pillowcase that was in the process of being pulled inside out. So that was the brief she gave to the pattern cutters. Cut me a pattern for a coat that has the qualities of the pillowcase being pulled inside out. So quite a different way of approaching it. So designers here is Miyake, Yohji Yamamoto, Ray Kawakibo, Yunya Watanabe, and Yoshiki Hishinuma. carrying on with the Japanese philosophy, a lot of their inspiration comes from their culture, their heritage. The kimono, the hakama, the samurai pants, and origami. Japanese were the first to use origami as a paper, as an art form in origami. And I thought it was quite interesting that origami is credited with having many benefits for design, such as developing hand-eye coordination, sequencing skills, attention skills, dexterity, patience, and temporal spatial skills. So just to recap, creating void space volume within clothing has the potential to create multi-sensory and interesting shapes that do not contour the body. Outcomes have the potential to be multi-sensory, conceptual, experimental, outside of fashion, spontaneous, non-prescribed, without preconceived ideas, comfortable, less restricting, timeless, sustainable, and responsible. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve. And how I'm going to do that. 2D flat sketches to 3D, in this case garments, the translation within fashion design can be challenging, as I've said. And students may become demotivated if their designs lose volume or fluidity during the flat pattern cutting process. So could thinking through shape making help students develop a more 3D volumetric approach to design, and thus becoming a more holistic fashion designer, so the designer and pattern cutter in one. Alien Body is a process-led framework that I've developed that really supports thinking through making. It aims to create visual and volumetric link between hand, eye, mind and process. It's thinking through making, but from 3D to 2D. So what is it really? It's in its first trial. It's 6 post-human forms. I brought one of them in here. They're basically padded bodysuits that fit over a conventional studio mannequin. I made 6 of them in the first instance, just as a trial. Made 3 symmetrical ones and 3 asymmetrical ones. They didn't have a lot of philosophy, a lot of thought in arrival at the exact shape, other than I thought that they could be interesting shapes to contour for fashion students. They all have heads, 3 humanoid heads and 3 alien heads. The mannequins were made them purposely with vertical seaming, to replicate the studio mannequins and tried to brand them as though they were studio mannequins. So they had a quite close relationship in fabric, branding and seaming to what the students were used to working with, apart from obviously the shape. So why is Alien important? Because it's unfamiliar, different, challenges convention, it's a departure into the unknown. The aim of the mannequins is to force the mind to look beyond preconceived ideas of body contouring. So the process-led framework was in three sets of workshops. The first workshop was called Encounter. And this forms the introduction, conception, and the initial flat pattern. It involves really encountering an unfamiliar shape to clothe. That shape could be anything. It can be a potato, it could be a box, it could be absolutely anything. And in this instance, it's a potato. So the students are invited to wrap the potato in pattern drafting paper, draw seam lines, notch it, so enabling it to be able to fit back together. Perhaps number those notches, as when the pattern's taken off the potato, it's often hard to remember where it went. And then put it back together again. Obviously the pattern, the paper is replicating the fabric as a flat form. So the students were then asked to form self-directed groups of around 4 to 5, so that they could discuss the process together. And randomly, they then selected an envelope containing a fabric swatch. So they didn't have to worry about choosing fabric or the colour of the fabric. They were randomly asked to select an envelope with a fabric swatch in. All the fabrics were black with the absence of colour. They didn't need to concern themselves with that. They were then asked to select in their groups one of the 6 alien mannequins. The mannequins were shrouded with fabric over the top, so they couldn't actually see what shape they were selecting. So it's all unknown, all random. And already there was an air of uncertainty and anticipation within the workshop. So in student groups, the students repeated the potato exercise but on the mannequin. So they were wrapping it in paper, drawing seam lines on it in response to the form and characteristics of their allocated fabrics. So there were 6 different fabrics, and the fabrics varied in the characteristics, and they had to engage with the fabric and to really bear that in mind where they were putting the seam lines. So they then removed the paper from the form. They were asked to keep seam lines or separation lines to a minimum, not too contrived, yet enough seams over the undulating points to create a flat pattern when it was removed. So more of the same. In the first workshop encounter, students discussing where they could put the separation lines and would those lines give enough separation once the pattern was removed from the 3-dimensional form to lay flat. Quite interesting. Some of the students started to draw faces on the paper, really on the mannequins, really engaging with the task, really enjoying it. So what students we're seeing here are first year BA fashion students in semester 1. So at this point they'd had no pattern cutting experience, they'd had no lessons in pattern cutting. So they'd removed their form from the alien, from the post-human form, and it was quite clear that obviously they hadn't got enough separation lines to make the pattern lay flat. So here they are discussing their options as to what to do next. The alien body workshops were trialled with all 3 years of the BA fashion design programme. So in total 110 students took part in the exercise over a 6-week period, but they were kept into their separate groups, so never the first, second and third years were mixed. They were all kept individually in their teaching groups. So we're moving now on to the second workshop, which is Envelop. And this was construction, conclusions and development. Each of the workshops, Encounter, Envelop and Explore, lasted just only 3 hours, so it's quite time efficient in the teaching process. And they got I felt as though they got a lot out of it in a short contact time. From the alien pattern produced in workshop 1, the students made a prototype garment in their allocated fabric to fit the form. So they set up a mini production line according to the skills that they already had. So here they're having a discussion on pattern shape. We've got some very interesting pattern shapes, and we talked quite a bit about that as to the interesting flat pattern shape would make an interesting seam contouring. So clear targets were set, and the toile, the prototype garment, needed to be completed within 2 hours. So it was all very tight, but they did seem to respond to that. But they were working in groups of around 4 to 5. So here they'd made their prototype garment up, or toile, and we've got the 6 different fabrics here. So now the alien form was removed, and the toile, the prototype garment derived from the alien form, was put onto a standard studio mannequin, sample size 12. Students sat around and discussed the voids that had been created from one form to another. The toiles were then tried onto a sample size person, a sample size 12 person, a student. An exploration of the relationship of the inner and outer spaces, of movement, functionality, aesthetics, scene positioning, and the emotional responses that the wearer felt from the space between the body and the outer shape. So the final workshop, entitled Explore, so we're on workshop 3 now, so they're on the, they've already had 6 hours, they're on their last chunk of 3 hours. The statement piece, so this was the development of the pattern that we've just seen, the contour of the alien. So they now had no creative constraints and no predetermined outcome, so they could do whatever they wanted. If they had the experience, they could integrate other pattern pieces, so a body block, they could do whatever they want. If they didn't want to do that, they could just develop the alien pattern. They could make it larger, make it smaller, taller, longer, whatever they wanted to do within their skill set. So they were aiming for a contemporary sculptural and wearable outcome. So discussions and toiling, prototype garment making, from 2D to 3D and 3D to 2D followed. This was supported by technicians. So trying on real people was encouraged to explore the creative limitations, movement and aesthetics. So we're arriving at the outcomes now. It was quite interesting that because all the alien forms had heads, most of the outcomes had hoods or high necklines. The conventional studio mannequins don't have heads as a normal rule. And I've always wondered why they don't, but there we go. And I found this interesting because students just seemed to put hoods or high necklines on because they were given a head. As I said, six fabrics were used throughout, and they were chosen because of very different characteristics. So 3 were natural fabrics and 3 were synthetics. They were all black, as we've already said, so the students could just concentrate on form. So there were lots of variants, some cropped, some elongated. So to summarise, the process-led framework consisted of 3 3-hour tutor-led workshops, plus self-directed time that the students organised themselves within their production groups, plus tutorials attached to the last workshop, so the development of the pattern. So really just to discuss the statement piece and how they might move that forward. And as I've already said, they did have technician support for the last process, Explore, for construction. So observations that I gained from that exercise. Some mannequins worked better than others. Friend here was the most popular one, and the lumpy bumpy one here was the least popular. Why? I'm just guessing at the one here on the left, perhaps a lack of undulation, not particularly visually stimulating, quite bulbous. The asymmetry perhaps is not obvious enough. On the other hand, the most popular one is quite visually stimulating, it's attractive, it's perhaps the least disfigured of the 6. Could it possibly be an exaggerated female form? However, it didn't always produce the most creative outcomes. Perhaps, could it be too human-like? Don't know. Observations. All 110 students were given questionnaires, very positive responses. So the results speak for themselves. They all enjoyed the process, they thought it was fun. That it does benefit 2D to 3D translations, 3D to 2D. It builds confidence and risk-taking. The exercise ended in an exhibition at the university. 18 garments. I think we had 48 garments in total, and 18 of the garments from those were selected for the exhibition. And they were selected on the basis of risk-taking, of unexpected outcomes, and a range of fabrics and a range of the alien forms that they originated from. It ran for 3 weeks and attracted over 1,000 visitors. The exhibition consisted also, probably can't really see from this photograph, but there were long paper hangings behind each of the alien where the flat pattern was drawn onto that. So you could see the shape that represented the final outcome and the alien form next to it that it originated from. After we'd done that exercise, some students, third-year students, in their independent work decided to use that process for developing some of their own garments. So they just used the process of padding the stand, which they hadn't done before. It wasn't evident that they'd done much of that before, but they had gained confidence, they found it engaging, and I was quite pleased to see that they were actually risk-taking themselves, creating their own alien face shape. So moving forwards from all that, the findings were disseminated at the Shape-Shifting Conference in New Zealand in 2013. I've started to explore workshops with architecture students at Newcastle University because the interaction of the void and space interests me, and really that's where I want to move forward from for the PhD. So here we've got architecture students coming from a very different starting point, but nevertheless we're all concerned with the human body and the ideas of space, movement, and the interaction of the environment. These are just a few of the slides that we used from there in the workshop I did with them. Tried to make it more structural, but somewhere there's a joining of the two. So the fashion to architecture, the origami, the interaction, the emotion, the multisensory experience. The volume, the inside, the outside. So, in summary, as I've already said, that the ideas as form the starting point of the PhD, exploring the sensory interaction of void and space between body and clothing and the space that it inhabits. I'm thinking at this point that the practical outcome will include clothing, using multisensory design, emotions, and senses as primary responses for creativity. Exploration of mannequin shape needs quite a lot of thought and work for contouring and linking with architecture. But the main issue is the sensory design and the space and the voids and how that affects our well-being. The images you've got here, quite random, but I've got Yohji Yamamoto here on the left with an upside-down wedding dress, and that was for the Wapping project in 2011. So it's inverted, the light bulb in the middle, very ethereal material, fabric, and the power station is flooded. The image on the right is called the ostrich pillow, which ironically is designed by an architecture company, and this is meant to be a device that you can wear anywhere and go to sleep. So it's padded. You can also put your head down, the holes on the side, you can put your arms through, so you can just put your head down and go to sleep theoretically anywhere, and it's burying your head in the sand, the ostrich pillow. So you can take a power nap in theory, in relative privacy, wherever you please. And that's where I'm at the moment. So are there any questions?